Greetings and welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here. Today we are going to discuss Kid A Mnesia, or Kid A Mnesia, I suppose. This album, these two albums came out in, Kid A came out in 2000, followed by 8 months later, Amnesiac, 2001. OK Computer came out in 1997, and that album was such a revolution. That album is still a masterpiece to me. So everyone was expecting, in Beatles-like fashion, you know, the next album to be even better and more of the same, but it wasn't. Radiohead wasn't going to be stuck in a box, and the next two albums, Kid A and Amnesiac, were not entirely different, but totally different, I would say, in that they were bringing in all these electronic music influences, which at that point, the Warp label was very big, Astralworks was very big, Ninja Tune. They were all doing amazing work out of the UK, all these incredible artists. And apparently Tom York was particularly into the artists on Warp, Boards of Canada, Aphex Twin. I'm not sure who else he was into. He's probably into all of it, and you started to hear that influence, the way that Radiohead combined it. And I remember I was lucky enough to interview Radiohead back in the day. First for OK Computer, I was going to be flown to Barcelona. I can't remember who the interview was for. Musician Magazine, perhaps, but I had some weird premonition that the plane was going to crash, so I didn't go. Don't ask me, I don't know. But then I did interview them 2 times after that for Kid A, for a magazine called Launch. It was online in the early days of online magazines. It eventually became Yahoo Music, with the great Dave DiMartino was our editor. And then I did a Tower Pulse cover story in 2001 for Amnesiac. For Kid A, they brought Radiohead over. We interviewed them in some hotel room, and the whole time I was doing the interview, Johnny Greenwood was playing with some sort of puppet. And then in 2001, they flew me to Oxford. Then I went to Radiohead HQ, which was really exciting, and they led me to a little room upstairs, and Tom York appeared, very curt, polite, but you could tell he didn't like press. When the hour was over, he knew exactly when the hour was over. There was no watch. There were no clocks on the walls, but he knew when the hour was over because he'd been doing interviews for so long. And as I recall, it was a pretty good interview. I also interviewed Colin Greenwood, bass player, and he was wonderful. He was really giving and sweet, and you can tell he liked doing interviews and interacting with press. He was a good counterbalance to Tom York, who wasn't mean or rude or anything. You could tell he wanted to get it over with. When OK Computer came out, it was such a landmark record. It still is, with all those amazing songs, and you can really hear the influence, as I said, of electronica on these records. And this is a Kid A, Amnesiac, and a third disc of B-sides. These are from digital files, even though much of this was recorded originally in Copenhagen to tape. Wikipedia says there are 50 reels of tape, but I'm sure they mixed down digitally, or I assume, because these are not remastered records. So if they were mixed down digitally, maybe there's no point in doing a remaster, I don't know. But back when these records came out, there were no US releases. There were no US releases on vinyl, it was only CD. And that was pretty much the nadir for the LP at that point, the early 2000s, before it started kicking up again in the mid-2000s. In the UK, when each of these albums came out, there were 2 10-inch records that came out, along with the CD. There were no files being released at that point, even though sometimes you get a little card with a download code. Kid A, 2000, was not released in the US until 2012 as 2 10-inch records, and then in 2016 as two LP records. And pretty much the same deal with Amnesiac, came out in 2001. In the US, there were 2 10-inch records in 2008, followed by 2 12-inch records in 2016. So it's really great to get these on vinyl. And it's a trifold with the typical, I believe the artist's name is Stanley Donen. And his work is mirrored on the paper inner sleeves that all pretty much look the same. There are no real liner notes, but I thought these records, the one I bought, they sound absolutely wonderful. The vinyl's flat, the vinyl looks clean. I haven't cleaned it. There's no weird shading on it like some Music Matters records. And they're uniformly pop and tick free. My copies are perfect. And I bought this at a Barnes & Noble for $60. I know the publicist for a lot of these things. Like I have a Cat Stevens box. They sent me the upcoming Tea for the Tillerman box to review. But I couldn't get vinyl on this. I don't think they were doing it because it's not a new record, it's a reissue. But it's amazing just listening back to these records, particularly Amnesiac, how beautiful these records are. I believe Kid A is more of a rock record. Everyone was sort of surprised by it. Amnesiac, done at the same sessions, is much dreamier and there's more rolling synth sounds, and I believe the Andes Martinet that Johnny Green was playing, that sounds like a theremin in some tracks. But as with OK Computer, these records sound fantastic on a system. I'm reviewing a pair of Canton 7K reference speakers right now into my Kuzma Stabiar, my Tavish Audiozyne Phonosage, into the Air EX8 2.0. And these speakers are a little gentle, but I think both of these records are slightly rolled off on top, which is great for vinyl listening. It's really easy to listen to. They're very lush, they're very dreamy, very nightmarish in places. For me, the difference between these two records is Kid A sort of throbs, as where Amnesiac is more gentle, and it has sort of it's very lush. They're both lush, but Amnesiac is more floating and ethereal in a way. And as I said, Kid A has more rock tunes, like National Anthem. But I think about, for me, my favorite song on Kid A, except for Everything in Its Right Place, which is great, is How to Disappear Completely, which is one of the most despondent, desolately beautiful songs of all time. I put it right up there with Frank Sinatra's Wandering and Nick Drake's Riverman for sheer desolation of spirit. And I read that Tom York actually got the phrase from Michael Stipe from REM, because after OK Computer and the incredible success of that, I believe Tom York went into a writer's block. And a lot of these songs were unfinished, and they weren't sure what to do. And maybe that's why Greenwood stepped up and contributed more electronic sounds, because and York as well, because you follow York's trajectory even now, he becomes almost an electronic artist with the solo albums he produces. There's just so much beauty on both of these records. And for me, particularly Amnesiac, Pyramid Song, which was inspired by a Charles Mingus tune, Freedom. And it's interesting because I had planned to do a Charles Mingus video and a Duke Ellington video. I was going to do Duke Ellington and or Charles Mingus, because on my brief search of YouTube for videos on Charles Mingus, there are none. I mean, there are videos of Charles Mingus playing, of course, a few. One amazing one with Clifford Jordan, Danny Richmond, and Eric Dolphy in Belgium, but there are no videos of anybody talking about it. It's weird. Most of the jazz critics, Ben Ratliff, Ted Goya, certainly Gary Giddens, Nate Chinnan, none of them are on YouTube. Nate Chinnan does a podcast. I mean, these are the guys. These are the jazz experts. I'm sort of an expert. I've been writing my jazz for a long time, and I was a player for a long time, as was Nate Chinnan, but none of them are on YouTube, so it's kind of insane to go on YouTube hoping to see somebody talking about Charles Mingus, and nobody is. I think Dan the Jazz Shepherd has probably done something on him. So anyway, but that's upcoming. But that beautiful song, Pyramid Song, with the big resounding piano chords and the way the drums kind of crash in like the surf, and then it just kind of swirls up into the heavens. It's just sort of astounding. I think it's in 5/4, or yeah, it's in 5/4, I believe. But as I said, there's so much beauty. You and Who's Army, Knives Out. Those are really beautiful tunes. And $60 is not much to pay for 3 LPs. And as I said, mine were in perfect condition. And the third disc of outtakes is, or alternate tracks, is definitely like a further extension of Amnesiac. It's very open and subtle. I mean, some of it sounds like demos and it sounds like experimentation. You hear what could have been alternate paths they could have taken on the same record. That third disc is really beautiful and a really good accompaniment to this. Would it have been nice to have a liner notes? You know, Radiohead doesn't really do liner notes. You know, some of this music's very spooky. Like I said, How to Disappear Completely. But by leaving it so open, they're one of the first bands of the internet era, and they had amazing videos, and that weird little bear with the head. They let you put your own imagination to it. So that's my brief take on Kid A, Mnesia. I think this is a great record, great pressing, great release, an essential release, if you don't already have the vinyl, which is probably worth a shitload. Bye.